Reclaimed Gray Spring brought gentle renewal to the city's botanical gardens, where Vivian walked slowly but steadily along the winding paths. 8 months had passed since the gala that had altered the trajectory of her life. Her health, though not fully restored, had stabilized under the care of her new medical team. The autoimmune condition would always require management, but she had found a treatment protocol that allowed her days of relative normalcy between episodes of fatigue. Today she had arranged to meet Thomas here, no longer a surprising occurrence, as their professional collaboration had evolved into a friendship neither rushed to define. His sustainable design firm was now working directly with her newly established Vivian Harlow Foundation, reclaiming her maiden name in both personal and professional spheres. Their first joint project, a therapeutic arts center with state-of-the-art environmental features, was nearing completion in a neighborhood that had never appeared on the society pages Jonathan had once courted. "The solar array installation is finally scheduled," Thomas announced as he joined her, offering a paper cup of tea from the garden's cafe. 3 weeks from Tuesday. "Just in time for the summer program," Vivian noted, accepting the tea gratefully. Their conversations often began this way, with practical updates that served as bridges to more personal exchanges. They walked in comfortable silence, pausing occasionally to admire particular blooms or unusual plantings. Thomas had introduced her to gardening during her recovery, teaching her to find meditative calm in the simple acts of digging, planting, and nurturing growth. Her patio apartment now flourished with containers of herbs and flowers, modest compared to the manicured grounds of her former estate, but entirely her own creation. "I saw Jonathan on the news yesterday," Thomas mentioned carefully. He never avoided the topic of her former life, but always approached it with sensitivity to her feelings. "The technology conference in Singapore?" Vivian nodded. "The new sustainable energy partnership." Following his leave of absence, Jonathan had returned to Pierce Technologies in a revised role, no longer CEO but Chief Innovation Officer, focusing on the technological advances that had been his original passion before empire building distracted him. The scandal had faded from headlines, replaced by cautious reports of the company's ethical recommitment and restructured foundation activities. "He looks different," Thomas observed. "Less polished somehow?" Vivian considered this. "He sent me a letter last month. No lawyers, no formal language, just thoughts, reflections. He's seeing a therapist regularly." "How did that make you feel?" Thomas asked, his genuine interest evident, peaceful, strangely enough. "Not because I've forgiven everything, but because I no longer feel defined by what happened." She paused by a bench overlooking a small pond. "Shall we sit for a moment?" As they settled on the bench, Thomas respectfully maintained the small space between them that characterized their evolving relationship. No rushed intimacy, no desperate grasping, just the gradual, careful building of trust. "The divorce is final next week," Vivian said quietly. "My lawyer says everything is in order." Thomas nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've been thinking about what comes after," she continued. "Not just legal designation, but personal direction." She turned slightly to face him more directly. "When I was married to Jonathan, every aspect of my life was mapped against his schedule, his priorities, his image. Even my charity work was ultimately connected to the Pierce name and reputation." "You've built something independent now," Thomas reminded her. "Something meaningful." "Yes," she agreed. "But I'm realizing independence isn't the ultimate goal either. Connection is authentic connection based on who we actually are, not who we pretend to be." Thomas's expression softened with understanding. "Authenticity requires courage. You've shown remarkable amounts of both." Vivian smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way it rarely had during her marriage. "I'd like to invite you to dinner next week. Not to discuss work or the foundation. Just dinner." The warmth in Thomas's gaze told her everything before he even spoke. "I'd like that very much." Across town, in a sparsely furnished apartment that contrasted sharply with his former penthouse, Jonathan Pierce reread the email that had arrived that morning from Dr. Sophia Laurent. After serving a 6-month license suspension and completing an ethics program, She had accepted a position with an international medical relief organization, work that would take her to refugee camps and disaster areas far from the privileged corridors of private practice. I think we both needed to lose everything to recognize what matters, she had written. I'm finding my way back to the physician I meant to be before ambition and compromise led me astray. I hope you're finding your path as well. Jonathan closed the email without responding. Their brief, intense connection felt like a chapter from someone else's life now, a catalyst for necessary destruction rather than a relationship of substance. The woman he still thought about daily wasn't Sophia, but Vivian, though he had accepted the irreversible nature of that loss. His phone chimed with a reminder: group therapy in 30 minutes. The weekly session had become an unexpected anchor in his reconstructed life, a place where neither his wealth nor his notoriety exempted him from the hard work of genuine self-examination. There he was simply Jonathan, learning alongside others how to align his outer actions with his inner values. Later that evening, as Thomas walked Vivian to her door following their first official date, the contrast between their tentative, honest connection and the elaborate illusions of her previous life could not have been more profound. When Thomas asked if he might see her again tomorrow, his hopeful expression reflecting none of the entitled confidence Jonathan had always projected, Vivian felt the last pieces of her old identity finally release their hold. "Tomorrow would be perfect," she replied, reaching for his hand with quiet certainty. The kiss that followed was gentle and unrushed. Not the beginning of a grand passion, but rather the thoughtful foundation of something that might, with care and honesty, grow into love of the most authentic kind. Not the love of fairy tales or social media displays, but the quiet, enduring connection between two people who had learned the hard way that true intimacy requires nothing less than complete truth. As Thomas drove away, Vivian lingered on her small porch, appreciating the simple pleasure of this ordinary moment in her extraordinary journey. The path ahead held no guarantees, but for perhaps the first time, she was walking it as her genuine self, a woman defined not by wealth or status or the reflection in someone else's eyes, but by the grace she had reclaimed from the ashes of public humiliation and private betrayal. In the end, the spectacular implosion of Jonathan and Vivian Pierce's perfect life had not been merely an ending, but the necessary destruction of a beautiful facade concealing an empty structure. From those ruins, each had begun building something less impressive. The golden facade. The autumn light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Pierce Foundation headquarters, casting Jonathan Pierce in a halo of gold as he addressed his executive board. At 45, Jonathan had cultivated both his business empire and his public image with meticulous precision. His technology conglomerate had revolutionized sustainable energy solutions, making him not just wealthy, but widely respected. "The Newcastle project isn't just about profits," he explained, his voice carrying the perfect blend of authority and warmth. "It's about creating renewable infrastructure in communities that have been overlooked." The board members nodded appreciatively, accustomed to Jonathan's talent for balancing philanthropy with profitability. When the meeting concluded, his assistant Olivia reminded him of his wife's medical appointment. "Mrs. Pierce asked if you could meet her there. Something about wanting your input on the treatment options." Jonathan frowned slightly. Vivian's mysterious fatigue and recurring migraines had been a concern for months now. Initially, they'd attributed it to the stress of managing her art foundation, but as symptoms persisted, worry had crept in. He messaged his driver and headed out. St. Elizabeth's Medical Center's private wing offered the discretion the Pierces valued. Jonathan found Vivian sitting in a consultation room, her posture perfect despite her exhaustion. At 42, Vivian Pierce remained striking. Her chestnut hair swept into an elegant updo, her green eyes bright despite the pain behind them. "You made it," she said, reaching for his hand. The slight surprise in her voice wasn't lost on him. How many appointments had he missed lately? "Of course," he replied, squeezing her fingers. "What did Dr. Harmon say?" "He's referring me to a specialist. She should be here any minute." As if summoned, the door opened, and Dr. Sophia Laurent entered. Jonathan's first impression was of competence. Her crisp white coat, the confident stride, the intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. Her dark hair was pulled back, emphasizing the fine structure of her face. "Mrs. Pierce, Mr. Pierce," she greeted them. "I'm Dr. Laurent. I've reviewed your file, and I think we need to run some additional tests." For the next half hour, Dr. Laurent outlined possibilities, everything from chronic stress to autoimmune conditions. Her manner was direct yet compassionate, particularly when addressing Vivian's fears. Jonathan found himself appreciating the way she simplified complex medical terminology without being condescending. "I'd like to see you twice weekly for the next month," she concluded. "We'll monitor how you respond to the medication and adjust accordingly." "Twice weekly?" Jonathan interjected. "Is that necessary?" Dr. Laurent turned her gaze to him. "Your wife's condition requires close monitoring, Mr. Pierce. I don't believe in half measures when it comes to patient care." Something in her steady gaze made Jonathan feel strangely exposed. He nodded, chastened. That evening, as they prepared for a foundation dinner, Jonathan watched Vivian struggle with her earrings, her hands trembling slightly. He moved behind her, fastening the clasp of her necklace. "Dr. Laurent seems thorough," he said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "She comes highly recommended." "Her specialty is complex diagnoses," Vivian replied. "I feel hopeful for the first time in months." The dinner proceeded like countless others, donors to impress, causes to champion, appearances to maintain. Yet beneath the practiced smiles, Jonathan felt an unfamiliar restlessness. Later that night, unable to sleep, he found himself in his study reviewing Dr. Laurent's credentials online. Board certifications, research publications, humanitarian work, impressive by any standard. His phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. "Reminder, Mrs. Pierce's appointment tomorrow at 2 p.m. You asked me to clear your schedule." Jonathan stared at the message longer than necessary. He couldn't remember the last time he'd attended 2 of Vivian's appointments consecutively. Perhaps it was time to be more present. Perhaps it was time for many things to change. UB2. Forbidden Whispers. The rhythm of Vivian's treatments quickly became a fixture in the Pierce household calendar. Jonathan, to his own surprise, found himself rearranging board meetings and investor calls to accompany his wife to Dr. Laurent's office. At first, he justified his attendance as necessary support for Vivian, whose condition seemed to fluctuate unpredictably, some days finding her almost restored to her former vitality, others leaving her barely able to leave their bedroom. It was during the 3rd week of treatment when Jonathan first stayed behind after Vivian had been escorted to the lab for blood work. Dr. Laurent was updating her notes when she noticed him lingering. "Something on your mind?" "Mr. Pierce?" she asked, her focus remaining on her tablet. "Jonathan, please," he corrected. "And yes, I'm concerned about the lack of concrete diagnosis. Vivian puts on a brave face, but I know she's frightened." Sophia set down her tablet and removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. A small gesture that suddenly humanized her. "Medicine isn't always linear, Jonathan. Complex cases like your wife's require patience." "Patience has never been my strong suit," he admitted. "In business, I'm accustomed to identifying problems and implementing solutions immediately." "People aren't corporations," she replied with the hint of a smile. "They can't be restructured or optimized on demand." Something about her direct manner, so different from the deferential treatment he typically received, intrigued him. Their conversation shifted from Vivian's health to healthcare policy, then to the Foundation's recent initiative funding rural medical centers. 15 minutes became 45, ending only when Vivian returned. The pattern established itself subtly. Jonathan would arrive early for appointments or linger afterward, engaging Sophia in conversations that gradually ventured beyond professional boundaries. He learned she had immigrated from France as a teenager, had worked with Doctors Without Borders, and played the cello, badly, by her own admission. He found himself sharing things, too. The pressure of maintaining his public image. His childhood in a struggling single-parent household. Dreams he'd abandoned along the way to success. "You've built an impressive life," Sophia remarked during one such conversation, as they walked through the hospital's private garden. Vivian had gone home earlier with her personal assistant. A carefully constructed one, Jonathan corrected. There's a difference. Their first inappropriate contact came innocuously, her hand on his arm as she laughed at his joke about a disastrous charity golf tournament. The touch lingered seconds longer than necessary, and neither acknowledged the current that passed between them. Meanwhile, Vivian's condition deteriorated. The tests revealed an autoimmune disorder requiring aggressive treatment. The medication left her drained and detached, widening the emotional distance that had been growing between the couple for years. Jonathan found himself calling Sophia outside of appointments, ostensibly for medical updates, but their conversations inevitably wandered. Late one evening, after a particularly difficult day when Vivian had suffered severe side effects from her treatment, Jonathan found himself texting Sophia from his study. "Sometimes I feel like I'm losing her in more ways than one." Sophia's reply came minutes later. "The Roosevelt Hotel bar. I'll be there in 30 minutes if you need to talk." He told himself it was innocent, a doctor supporting the spouse of a patient through a difficult time. Yet he changed his shirt before leaving and applied cologne. The hotel bar was discreet, dimly lit, and far from the usual haunts of anyone in their social circle. Sophia arrived wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, so different from her clinical appearance that Jonathan felt momentarily disoriented. 3 drinks and 2 hours later, the pretense of a professional consultation had evaporated completely. "You're not what I expected," she admitted, her fingers dangerously close to his on the small table. "What did you expect? Another entitled billionaire who sees people as commodities. And now?" Her eyes met his. "Now I see someone trapped in a life that's become a performance." When his hand finally covered hers, neither pulled away. When he suggested another drink in his private office downtown, completely empty at this hour, she agreed without hesitation. The affair blossomed with reckless intensity over the following weeks. Clandestine meetings in her apartment, messages encrypted and deleted, elaborate excuses for his absences, all while Vivian fought her illness, unaware of this second betrayal by the people meant to care for her most. Jonathan rationalized his behavior as seeking solace during a difficult time. Sophia justified hers as an unexpected connection with a complex man. Neither admitted the selfishness driving their actions, nor the inevitable devastation their choices would cause. By the 6th week of their affair, they had established patterns and protocols for communication, private email accounts, a messaging app with disappearing texts, code words for their meetings. What they couldn't control, however, was human error, and Jonathan's was leaving his private tablet unlocked while showering in Sophia's apartment, just as her cleaning service arrived a day earlier than scheduled. The housekeeper, Mariana Diaz, had a nephew who worked at the Chronicle's digital news desk. The information she provided him seemed too explosive to be true, but the screenshots she'd taken provided undeniable evidence. As the young journalist began investigating further, he discovered a trail that both Jonathan and Sophia, in their infatuation, had been too careless to fully conceal. The annual Pierce Foundation humanitarian gala was approaching, the pinnacle of the social calendar, and Jonathan's moment to unveil their billion-dollar commitment to global healthcare initiatives. Neither he nor Sophia realized that someone else had plans for an unveiling of their own. The shattering gala. The grand ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel glittered with the combined wealth of 500 elite guests. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables adorned with orchid centerpieces, while waitstaff in tailored black uniforms circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The annual Pierce Foundation Humanitarian Gala had transformed the space into a showcase of opulence ostensibly in service of compassion. Vivian Pierce made her entrance on her husband's arm, a vision in midnight blue silk that concealed how much weight her illness had claimed. Her medication had been adjusted that week, giving her a window of relative strength she was determined to use for this important night. Her foundation's art therapy program for critically ill children would be receiving significant funding, and despite everything, She remained dedicated to her cause. "You look beautiful," Jonathan whispered as they paused for photographs. The guilt that had become his constant companion intensified at the sight of her brave smile. "Just stay close," she murmured back. "These events drain me more than they used to," he nodded, acutely aware that Dr. Sophia Laurent would be arriving shortly, invited as a representative of the medical community and potential partner for the Foundation's new global health initiative. They had agreed to maintain absolute professionalism, limiting their interaction to brief, necessary exchanges. The evening progressed according to the meticulously planned schedule. Cocktails flowed, the silent auction raised record amounts, and influential guests networked under the pretense of philanthropy. Jonathan moved through the crowd with practiced charm, though his eyes frequently darted to the entrance, anticipating Sophia's arrival with equal measures of dread and longing. When she finally appeared, wearing a conservative yet elegant burgundy gown, he forced himself to acknowledge her only with a distant nod. She responded in kind, engaging instead with a group of medical researchers near the bar. The space between them hummed with unspoken tension that only they could feel, or so they believed. At the head table, Vivian noticed her husband's distraction, but attributed it to the pressure of the evening's keynote address. As dinner concluded, she squeezed his hand encouragingly before he approached the podium. The room quieted as Jonathan Pierce, philanthropist and visionary, prepared to announce his foundation's most ambitious initiative yet. "Good evening," he began, his confidence apparent in every syllable. "Tonight represents not just a celebration of what we've accomplished, but a commitment to what lies ahead. The Pierce Foundation is proud to announce a 5-year, $1 billion investment in global healthcare infrastructure." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Behind him, the massive screen displayed impressive graphics illustrating the initiative's potential impact. As Jonathan continued his address, he didn't notice the young man approaching the audio-visual control booth, nor the brief disagreement with the technician that ended with the technician stepping away, looking concerned, because everyone deserves access to dignity in their healthcare journey, Jonathan was saying when the screen behind him flickered and changed. Instead of the Foundation's presentation, the massive display now showed a text message exchange. The timestamps were recent. The names were unmistakable. Jonathan, 11:42 p.m. Miss you. Last night was worth the risk. Sophia, 11:45 p.m. We need to be more careful. Almost ran into Richard from your board at the hotel. But yes, worth every risk. The room fell into stunned silence. Jonathan turned, saw the display, and froze mid-sentence. His eyes instinctively sought out Sophia, who had gone deathly pale, then Vivian, whose expression transformed from confusion to comprehension to devastation in terrible slow motion. Before security could intervene, the screen changed again, showing more messages, more intimate details, and finally, a photo of Jonathan and Sophia entering her apartment building together. Time-stamped during hours when he had claimed to be at business meetings, pandemonium erupted. Photographers who had been documenting the gala for society pages now turned their cameras toward the unfolding scandal. Vivian, displaying remarkable composure, rose from her seat and walked steadily toward the exit, ignoring Jonathan's desperate attempt to reach her through the chaotic crowd. "Vivian, please," he called out, but was intercepted by her brother Wesley, who had been seated nearby. "Don't you dare follow her," Wesley growled, physically blocking his path. From across the room, Sophia attempted to approach, perhaps to explain or apologize, but was stopped by the Foundation's PR director, who whispered urgently in her ear. The message was clear: leave immediately, say nothing. By morning, every news outlet and social media platform blazed with headlines. Healthcare hypocrisy. Billionaire's affair with wife's doctor exposed at own charity gala. The young journalist responsible, Mateo Diaz, received job offers from 3 major publications within 24 hours. His source, his aunt who cleaned Sophia's apartment, remained anonymous, protected by journalistic privilege. For Vivian, the public humiliation was secondary to the private betrayal. Not only had her husband been unfaithful, but the doctor she had trusted with her health, with her vulnerability and fears, had violated every professional and personal boundary. The dual betrayal left her reeling in the sanctuary of her sister's home, where she retreated as the media frenzy intensified. Jonathan's frantic calls and messages went unanswered. His empire, built on an image of integrity and compassion, began showing fissures as board members called emergency meetings and sponsors reconsidered their associations. Yet his primary concern remained Vivian. Not just for what he had done to her, but for her health now left in turmoil without her doctor, what none of them could have anticipated was how this spectacular fall from grace would ultimately forge a path to something more genuine than the gilded cage they had all inhabited. Hollow Empire, the Pierce Technologies headquarters, had never felt so cavernous as it did 6 weeks after the gala. Jonathan sat alone in his corner office, staring at the stack of resignation letters from board members, the withdrawal notices from major philanthropic partners, and the preliminary divorce papers delivered that morning. The empire he had spent decades building was crumbling with stunning rapidity. Outside his door, a skeleton crew of loyal staff attempted to manage the ongoing crisis. Most notable among them was Eleanor Winston, his chief legal counsel of 15 years, who had refused to abandon ship despite her obvious disappointment in him. The medical board has suspended Dr. Laurent's license pending their ethics investigation, Eleanor reported, entering without knocking, a new development in their previously formal relationship. She's requesting to meet with you, which I strongly advise against. Jonathan nodded absently. He hadn't spoken to Sophia since the night of the gala. Their relationship, built on stolen moments and superficial understanding, had evaporated in the harsh light of exposure. What surprised him most was not the loss of the affair, but how little he mourned it compared to the devastation of his marriage. "And Vivian?" he asked, the question that began every conversation now. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Her legal team reiterates that all communication should go through proper channels. But informally, I heard from Wesley that she's continuing treatment with a specialist in Switzerland." The distance Vivian had placed between them was both physical and emotional. Her only direct communication had been a brief, formal email confirming she would not be returning to their home and requesting privacy during her ongoing medical treatment. "The board meeting is at 3, Eleanor continued. "They're voting on whether to remove you as CEO. Gerald is leading the opposition, but he doesn't have enough votes yet. If you make a public statement of contrition and announce a temporary step back—" "No more public performances," Jonathan interrupted. "I'm done with the carefully scripted apologies and managed appearances." Eleanor studied him with professional assessment. "This isn't just about your reputation anymore, Jonathan. Thousands of employees depend on the company's stability. The Foundation's projects worldwide need continued funding. The weight of these responsibilities had once defined him. Now they felt like another layer of pretense he could no longer maintain. Schedule the meeting. I'll be there." Left alone, Jonathan turned to the wall of windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Vivian was rebuilding her life without him. The thought hollowed him out in ways the business losses couldn't touch. Across the city, in a modest apartment she had rented under her sister's name, Vivian Pierce sat across from Thomas Mercer, an environmental architect whose firm had once consulted on a small project for her arts foundation. Their meeting today, however, was purely personal. "I appreciate you agreeing to see me," Thomas said. At 48, his face carried the weathered evidence of someone who worked outdoors as often as at a drafting table. "When your foundation canceled our rainwater collection system, I understood given the circumstances, but I wanted to see if there was any way to continue the project elsewhere." Vivian studied him thoughtfully. In the weeks since her world imploded, she had grown accustomed to people approaching her with either morbid curiosity or uncomfortable pity. Thomas displayed neither. "The Children's Art Center still needs that system," she acknowledged. "But the Foundation's funds are currently—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Complicated." "I wasn't thinking about funding," Thomas clarified. "I was thinking about purpose. The system is designed, the materials sourced. It seems a waste to abandon something valuable because of circumstances beyond its control. His choice of words struck her. Circumstances beyond its control. Wasn't that precisely her situation? "Tell me about your other projects," she said suddenly. "The ones that have nothing to do with the Pierce name." Thomas's expression brightened, and for the next hour he described sustainable housing initiatives in underserved communities, natural disaster recovery designs, and educational programs teaching ecological principles through hands-on building projects. His passion was evident not in polished presentation, but in authentic enthusiasm. "I'm sorry," he said eventually, seeming to remember himself. "I didn't mean to monopolize the conversation." "It's refreshing," Vivian admitted, "hearing someone talk about work that matters without calculating its publicity value." Thomas considered her words. "May I speak candidly, Mrs. Pierce?" "Vivian, please?"